computer. Okay, we are recording. Hi, this is the Cheeky Mom, and we are recording in advance. So this will be shown on Wednesday. So we are here Friday because Ryan has a real job and
yeah, real-ish.
Real-ish. So this is my friend Ryan Weston.
Hello.
And we are going to talk history, whatever.
You're in charge.
Yes, let's do this. Okay. I usually start out and I always talk about where and how I met this person, and ours is different.
I'm not a mom.
No, he is not a mom.
Aaron and I know each other because Mike and I know each other because Mike and I are both reenactors in the same organization, both Civil War reenactors, yes. And I was a member of the organization. He came in and I was immediately smitten with him.
It's the accent.
Yeah, it's like him lilting across the battlefield. I'm like, what is the origin of that beauty? And I met Mike, and the rest is history.
And that says a lot because he didn't have his facial hair yet, so he looked like a brand spanking new baby.
He looked like a brand new. I was like, what is that accent and that shiny face?
The shiny face. Yeah, so that's how I met you. And then we, the first year that Mike and I did the Christmas party.
Yeah, no, we had the annual Christmas party with the company. It's a large organization. It's a mixed organization. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. Where you're not personally friends with, I mean, anyone's been a member of an organization where you're part of a dart league or something, and you're friends with a couple folks. Yeah. And there's a couple folks you're like, I don't want to go to a barbecue at their house. And that's kind of how our fair organization is. And so the first Christmas party, they were kind of like, where are we going to sit?
Well, no, what happened is that Alan was setting up, and like the Alice's are always on time, right? And so we were early because it's hurry up and wait. And so yeah, so I had the big old green dress on, and Mike was helping Alan bring in stuff, and I'm sitting there in the bottom of the DeSoto hotel in my big green dress, and people are also having Christmas parties, but normal ones, right? And they're passing me,
not dressed like that.
Yeah, and they're passing me and like doing a double take, and I'm like, a part of me wanted to be like, woo. But Mike was like, we were in charge of putting people at tables. Oh, now the secret's out.
Oh, so it wasn't an accident that we got to sit together. She's always misinformed this whole time. I thought it was a happenstance.
He's like, okay, I don't want to sit with these people. Let's Sarah and Ryan. So we got to sit with you guys.
Oh,
so yeah, and it was a great time.
Yeah.
And then me and Sarah became best friends that night.
Mike and I hardly talk anymore, but the two of them are on. And
we hold it all together.
Yeah, it does a really nice relationship.
Well, let's talk about Civil War.
Okay.
Obviously with COVID, you guys are not working.
That's right.
And then last year you guys had a little hiccup at Wakanda because of the Confederate flags.
Yeah, there's out what's going on now if you don't know what went on then, and I think that's an issue that we're facing with this hobby. Just as we speak, you know, COVID-19 has reoriented the way we live our lives and has put a big break on our education for our children. And the first thing they're cutting from programs, social studies. Yeah. First thing, we don't have time for that. We can't e-learn social studies. Kids, you're on your own. Well, it seems as if we've been doing this our whole lives, and now we've reached a point where we have such a misunderstanding of our history that it's difficult to then figure out what's going on. And again, I don't, by no means am I like a Confederate apologist or the flag should be flown or anything. I do not need to get into that. That's most definitely not where we're going with this. It's very hard now to put on a display of our Civil War because people are angry and they're in camps and and you should be. It's not a pleasant topic. But yeah, last year, Wakanda, we had, really, I think we're facing for the first time where people were questioning the use of public land in conjunction with the Confederate flag, saying, look, our tax dollars go to this green space, and we're not really keen on having a display of that in that area. And it was a huge falling out.
I mean, I know that Mike has been in for maybe like 8 years now. And I noticed one year in Shanahan, when you guys were there, that the sidelines were like becoming like a football game or something.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and you had guys waving Confederate flags and stuff, and it's like,
no hazard looking, yeah.
And it's kind of like, no, that's not what this is about.
Yeah, we don't want cheerleaders. It's
right.
not, you know, we're not supposed to be rooting for the bad guys, and that's what we're doing with the bad guys.
Well, and that's the other thing is that we should say that you and Mike are on the Confederate side. Yeah, so, correct. And the thing with like Mike, well, didn't he, like, there was some history where his character is actually, there was a Brit.
Yeah, there's, in our unit historically, we do actually portray real people. We're not just choosing, you know, hey, we're Lexington Rifles, 2nd Kentucky Cavalry Company A, and there was famously one English individual in the unit, and that's where, you know, Mike fell right into that because he didn't have to fake the accent, which was nice.
That other guy got
that. Other guy was like, look, you're terrible. This guy doesn't play
that is Australian, yeah, and
so, I don't know where you're going with that Scottish accent, but you are out of here. Yeah, I mean, we do portray Confederate, and it's never been a case like when I first got into reenacting, I was working in an industry where an individual approached me and said, hey, you know, you'd be great for this. Have you ever thought about it? And I said, well, as a kid, yeah, but not as an adult. I never thought I could do it. And so I was kind of hooked at Kelly, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And we get about a half an hour into the conversation. I said, well, you guys are like Union infantry, right? And he's like, oh, no, we're Confederate cavalry. And I was like, record scratching sound. Like, is that okay?
Yeah.
He's like, why wouldn't it be? You know, it's part of our history. Now, this was 10 years ago. I said, this is part of our history. We need to have the story told from both sides. So, yeah. Well, of course, yeah. And in my head, yeah, of course, you know, just because you're a Confederate reenactor doesn't mean you're a Confederate. You know, I live in Chicago, we're Chicagoland, you know, and so that never was an issue in my mind. But now it's like you're saying, you're starting to see the sidelines at some of these events, and you're like, I'm not comfortable with the people rooting for me because they shouldn't be rooting for me. Yeah. We should be just watching this and trying to learn something. That was the whole idea of doing this in the first place.
Right. You know? And that's, I did appreciate a couple years ago when you guys were in Elgin, it just started, I think they had Harriet Beecher Stowe. Was that who? No. There was a Black woman there, and she was telling them like about slavery and stuff, yeah. and she was new on the scene, like 2 years ago, and I was like, finally, that's kind of cool. They're bringing in
more representation,
across like across the board, and not just like glorifying the, you know. Yeah,
and that's the thing. You tread a really thin line. Are we telling the story, or are we glorifying it? Because we can't glorify it. There shouldn't be any glorifications. I mean, really, it is the nadir of the American experience. Our government system fell apart. We were embroiled in internecine warfare for 4 years. 750,000 people were killed. We think, we're not even sure the civilian population, there's no number for slaves. Could have been 1 million people lost their lives. This is not something to glorify. It's not like, you know, you know, and that's part of the problem, is because our generation, we did grow up with the Dukes of Hazzard, and we grew up with, anytime the Confederate flag was flown, it was like someone just being actually rebellious streak. But it's a rebellious streak. It's like the Rebel Rouser song from the 50s, you know, like, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that you're bucking authority. And it's like, no, it means more than that. I mean, both flags mean so much, but just, we grew up with it being part of like just a normal, it was no big deal if you saw it. And now we're just coming around as a people and saying, well, do we want to see it anymore? And how should it be flown? And what does it mean? And that kind of thing. And that's where we're at with reenacting, is I don't know. The future is uncertain.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you think going forward? Because I know that Mike is on the fence.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he's never, you know, he just said he liked to be on a losing team all the time because of being British, especially here in America.
Right.
So he was okay with it.
Right. He's just sticking with his history.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, the future is uncertain. I don't want to be involved in anything more than the history, more than the education opportunity. The opportunity to make history live. That's the whole idea of reenacting it.
And that's what you went through college for.
Yeah, right, exactly. This is what it looked like. This is what it sounded like. Let's talk about it. Let's have an intelligent conversation. I want the kids to come through camp and say, gee, it must be hard to live without a cell phone and electricity and running water. Yes, it is. You know, that kind of thing. But with the unrest in our country and reanalyzing the way we think about our history and about the Confederate flag and about, you know, honestly, the treatment of African-American people and their experiences in this country, you start to question, can we reenact the Civil War anymore?
Right.
Is it something that we're going to be able to do, or are we going to have to rethink the whole process? And I don't know. I'm on the fence because, like I said, I don't want to be part of a group that is going to be associated with negativity. I can't. It was never my goal in the first place.
Right, and I think that's where
it's
exactly where Mike is with it all too. I mean, as much as it's fun to walk around Galena in big dresses and cool clothes, I mean, yeah, no, it's not.
It wasn't then, and it's not now.
No, but I mean, and that, I mean, we did have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like at the same time, when it comes down to it, we don't want to offend either.
Right.
So,
and I don't also want to be perceived as something that I'm not.
Yeah.
That's important as well. I don't want someone to see me and say that person is a part of this group because of his associates and the dress that he has on, his uniform, and now I automatically judge that person because unfortunately that's where we're at with stuff.
Yeah.
We're at with in our society with everything. Everyone is judged on their appearance immediately. You make your decision instantaneously. And cantering about in a park with a Confederate cavalry uniform on right now maybe doesn't send the right message.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where Mike is sitting right now, is that he did like it, he loved the history of it, but now it's like getting icky, and it's like, do we need to have it? I mean, yes, I agree that it kind of goes with like, oh, you're erasing history, but how many times do we see people that were actually there listening to Eric talked about nobody's listening. Hopefully he doesn't hear this or see this.
As soon as he sees my name associated with
this, okay, good, because it is, I mean, honestly, it is, from a spectator's point of view, it is monotone and like, here comes the cavalry, and they were
with all the alarm of a caterpillar as we come thundering out of the woods at 1 mile per hour.
Yes, so that's, I mean, I think if we do move forward to where we have it more history based, then I think, and like drive it home and maybe get more Black people involved.
Yeah,
because definitely. I mean, and that might be why they don't want to be involved, because it's a shitty part of their heritage.
It's not a sunny part, and that's it though, and that's part of the problem too. Is that, look, you had roughly 75 years of slavery prior to our Civil War that was aided, abetted, and supported by the United States flag.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the part from our revolutionary period to 1860. We kept making compromises to extend slavery and to make it okay, because let's face it, the American economy ran on slavery. Yeah. We didn't like it. It was ugly. And England didn't like it, but their garment industry ran on our slave-picked cotton. Their garments could never be affordable if you had to pay the workers.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget about that part, that the Stars and Stripes aided and abetted slavery for those 75 plus years. You have 4 years of open interscene warfare where the stars and bars, the Confederate flag, represents really the angry white people that are finally willing to fight for slaves. And then you have the 100 years after the Civil War of the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights era, where again, all of the racism and disenfranchisement and restrictions that were placed on African American people were done so under the auspices of the Stars and Stripes again. So we need to look at this whole period that we're reenacting and saying that Confederate flag doesn't represent our 4 years of hate. It has no monopoly on racism and on bigotry and on racial violence. I mean, it's been all over the news that the Tulsa riots in 1921 that were written right out of our history, that no one knows anything about, was just paved right over. 1921, not 1821, 1921. I had a great grandmother that was in high school when that happened.
Right. And what's so weird is I never heard of that. And I listened to a podcast and I was like, what the hell? Like,
what are we talking about here?
Well, and then all of a sudden the movies that I don't know if you've seen it. They had like, one of the residents during that time before all of this happened was taking movies, and it was like a whole Black community living happy.
It was considered the Black Harlem. It was literally,
and that's why they were dressed like to the nines, and they were having picnics.
That's why there were riots, because the white people in town got tired of Black people being flipped, basically. But I mean, our history of racial violence in this country,
we never learned about that.
Chicago had the huge race riots in 1919 that were caused because an African American child went over the line on the beaches, and so then the white people rioted for days, totally justified. So you have that, you have all the civil rights violence, you have Dr. King's assassination in Memphis in '68. All of this is happening under the various versions of the United States flag. So when you come to a Civil War reenactment, but when you talk about our Civil War period, it's very, very important to not think and see the Union side represents and franchisement for African Americans and civil rights and civil liberties, and black people are going to be equal. And it's those darn rebels, those 4 years of rebels that have really, they're putting a squash on it. But once the Union wins, it's all better, because it's absolutely not the story. It's absolutely not the case. And that's part of the history that we need to really focus on and say, when you come to a Civil War reenactment, you're not watching one team that's interested in equal rights and one team that's not. Lincoln had the Emancipation Proclamation go into effect January 1st, 1863. Grant at that time was general out west. He was winning his battles in the Western Theater, and he had yet to be moved east, but that was coming in 64. He had entire regiments from Ohio and from Indiana pick up and say, we quit. And Grant's like, you don't quit, you're in the army. It's like, no, we didn't come out here to fight for black rights. We came out here to put down this rebellion. We never signed up for, giving black people rights. And that was happening across the entire Union Army throughout the entire course of the war. You have the draft riots, and we just celebrated. The anniversary of that was Wednesday, I believe, the 1863 draft riots in New York, where Lincoln had to enact a draft because of the losses in combat, which were just after Gettysburg was the beginning of July, and lost 50,000 soldiers combined. So he enacted a draft. And two things about the draft that was very irksome, that New York exploded in riots. One, he had just had the Emancipation Proclamation come to be, that we were going to free slaves in territory that were occupied by the Union Army. And two, you could buy your way out of the draft for $300. So new immigrants in this country were looking at each other and saying, okay, so not only can I not afford to buy myself out of the draft, so this automatically made this a rich man, poor man's war, but now newly freed African Americans are not subject to the draft, and I am. And I didn't come to this country to fight for their rights. New York erupted in riots for 3 days. The Union Army had to be pulled in fresh off the field from the battlefield of Gettysburg to fire on the crowd. 2,000 people were injured. I think 100 or so were killed before it was over. So again,
we kind of glazed
right over that.
Right.
The Gangs of New York movie. That came out in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
They show kind of a Hollywood version of that towards the end of the movie, but that really did happen. And that's something that's important when we go to a Civil War reenactment and say, nobody here wants African American rights. Nobody here is looking for equal rights. Nobody here is standing for this. The reason why there's a term abolitionist is because you were a weird little fringe group. The rest of the country wasn't interested. And if we focus on that and say, it's all wrong, it's all wrong, everything we're seeing here is wrong. Lincoln really did maybe want to do this. He knew that it was a way to win the war, and I think, honestly, had he lived through his second term, he would have pushed for it. Once he was martyred, I mean, Grant's presidency, he tried really hard. And then he was the last president that tried till like Teddy Roosevelt. So we go from like 1877 to like 1901, where just the South is allowed to just run itself into the ground. And by then it was too late. It's too late. So again, what are we representing as reenactors is important, not just Confederate or Union, cavalry infantry. Is like, this is a part of our history that's not being told correctly. Kids are growing up understanding that the Union Army is a crusading army that's going down south, and the slaves are coming out from the plantations, and they're all handing them money, and here's your voting rights, and here's your keys to your property. It's not the case. It's not the case at all. Sherman wasn't particularly fond of the slaves that were freed in the Atlanta campaign. I would never stoop to the coarse language he used, but he wasn't happy to have them around his army. You're in my way. I'm here to crush the rebellion, not give you freedom.
Okay, so then let's talk about erasing history. How do you feel about all of them taking, like if we're taking down monuments and stuff like that? Do you think that is erasing history?
Well, here's the thing. Yes and no. For years now, we've been talking about this, not you and I personally, but we as a nation.
We don't talk about that.
We don't ever talk about history, and we probably never will again after today, because she's going to be so done with me. We as a nation have been struggling with the issue of these Confederate monuments for years, and I have been a proponent of moving them, taking them down and moving them. And what I find is many people who are hotly debating this have never seen them. I've never been to a Confederate monument, because let's face it, we're in Northwest Indiana right now. There probably is the Confederate monument around here for miles. There might be one, but
who takes a vacation to go see these?
Yeah, right. Let's face it, they're usually not in nice neighborhoods. And you know why? nice neighborhood, because most of these Confederate monuments are in African-American neighborhoods in the South somewhere that is utterly disenfranchised and is a 90% or plus Black population. And here's the thing. If you go to a monument and it says on there, this is a monument to our Civil War and to this particular general or this particular so-and-so that hailed from this area and who fell in combat or didn't, who just fought and for what he believed in, and this was a terrible experience for us as a nation, and we move on. That's how monuments are generally in Europe. If you go to European battlefields, many of the monuments that are everywhere are akin to that. But the monuments in this country were put up in the 1870s, 1880s, 90s, 19-teens, 20s, when the rise of Jim Crow and racial violence and things, and they were put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy or other organizations that says, you know, language like dedicated to our brave soldiers who fought for their great cause and what they knew was right and blah, blah, blah. So that the spirit they went up with is bad to begin with.
Right.
And then you see, I won't prattle on for too long for this, but a great example of this is Memphis, Tennessee. If you've ever been to Memphis, there's Beale Street. Memphis is also where Dr. King was assassinated. There's clearly a history of racial violence there. And to this day, Memphis is primarily African-American. From my experience there, there's really only one good green space that you could go if you had a family, a dog, you know, throw a frisbee, whatever. The rest of it's kind of urban blight and just an old urban city. One big green space. So along the river, the Mississippi, there's a Confederate monument there. And it's not like, that's that really big wasp. That was not a comic relief. There's really a giant wasp.
Oh, he's going to go visit.
Okay, he's going to go attack our spouses. It's not life size. It's not twice life size. It's not 4 times life size. It's easily twice the size of your house. There's a Confederate monument in this park, the only green space in this primarily Black area. And it's not to a Confederate soldier, random, or to our Confederate cause. It's to a Confederate general, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a founding member of the Ku Klux Klan, served as their first Grand Wizard of the Klan. During the war, was famous for his racial atrocities like the Fort Pillow Massacre, where he had his men, when he discovered that there were Union soldiers that were Black, kill every single one of them, execute them in the river, and was proud to report that the river ran red with their blood for 100 yards in each direction. Then went on to form the Ku Klux Klan, and now you're an African-American family that lives in Memphis, Tennessee, and you want to take your dog to the only real green space, and you have to look up at the statue that is so big that you could drive a pace bus under the horse's legs, and it's Nathan Bedford Forrest in the Green Park with his sword in the air. What image does that send? What is the message? You know, is that appropriate? What's done is done. What history is history. You can't change it. That's the important thing. I'm not an advocate of changing it. But does anyone know that that's what happened with this person? Is that what the plaque says? I doubt it.
No, don't think the plaque says that.
The plaque goes on
like
about
his
that.
quote.
Yeah, his quote, you know. He's got a number of other colorful quotes that I
sure.
won't regurgitate right now that could also be put on there. Is that appropriate today in 2020? I personally don't think so.
No.
I don't think the statue should be put in a smelter and turned into brass to be used into something else. I think it should be put somewhere, or if you want to see it, it's in a museum or in a monument.
Even fit in a museum.
Well, a monument park or something like that, where the reason why you're going there is to see it. Whatever the reason is that you're going, if you're a supporter of what he did, I guess that's your opinion and that's your own thing. But you can go there and be with people who maybe feel likewise, and then you see the statue and you go home.
But how many families are actually going to, like, come on, kids, get in there, and we're going to the monument museum.
Let's go to Monument Land. Well, and that's the problem. What kind of attraction is this? But then that begs the question, what kind of attraction is it in the park?
Right.
If nobody wants to see it, then...
Well, that's just it. You know no damn family is going on a vacation to go see that.
Knowing when I stood there underneath this enormous statue and knew who it was and knew what he did and what he stood for, and knowing that Sarah and I walked the hour from there to the motel where Dr. King was assassinated, just the juxtaposition is just rotten. It made me feel rotten. It made me think, these two big, this is one of the most monumental moments in history, not Forrest, but Dr. King's assassination. Like this moment in time that is just such a tragedy. And to be able to stand where that happened, knowing that if I got up on the roof of the Lorraine Motel and I had good enough binoculars, I could probably see Nathan Bedford Forrest's face looking at me over the city, just made me feel like what are we doing here?
Yeah.
We need to understand that these are two important aspects of our history, but this is not appropriate.
Well, and that's like when they were saying that they were taking down some of these, they're made so shitty because of the fact that it was just like a thing like, aha, we're going to take this and stuff it in your throat in this neighborhood. And it's kind of like, that's where you know what, it's like, I hate the whole thing. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but they're taking down pure crap, basically. It wasn't like somebody sit there and chiseled it out of marble and, you know.
And again, the spirit.
Yeah.
The spirit of what it's up, what does it represent, and what is it trying to tell the people who want to come see it? And if the only people who see it every day are African-American families trying to go about their life, and there's this towering figure of hate over them. Now, not every Confederate monument is a towering figure of hate. I just use this particularly heinous example as a point.
Yeah.
That maybe this one is one we could rethink. And you notice you don't hear it in the news because there's no way you could tear that thing down. You'd have to steal a wrecking ball to take this thing down. I mean, it honestly must be dozens of tons. It is the biggest.
I wonder why.
Yeah, right. No one's tearing this one down. I'll tell you who would.
Oh God. All right. Well, let's switch. Let's just
pull the levers because we're going down a path that maybe.
I know we're gonna just get angrier and angrier, and there's not enough beer in the world to calm us down.
Ice water.
Yes.
Well,
it's early. It's still early.
Right. She's insinuating.
Well, then again,
I love how she's insinuating that if we were having this talk like in an hour and a half, this would be straight whiskey, like
or Malort or whatever you and Mike drink.
Look, hailing from Cook County in Illinois, Malort is part of our lifeblood. And Death Elixir.
Well, and it seems like that's our day thing too.
Yeah, right. And
that's why we have the Fox behind us too. We go to a bar. What is it called?
It has a real name.
I know. What is the real name? The Snooty?
Snooty Fox, I believe.
Yeah. And we've changed it.
Not we. There's an English charm that goes into this.
Well, if you and I say it, it doesn't come across. Mike says it, it's charming.
It's known as a C-bomb. In modern parlance, but for some reason it means more over here or differently.
Right, like Mike throws it around like, damn.
Again,
but it's cute.
It's charming.
Yeah, totally charming. But yeah, let's talk about your book.
Okay.
So,
in the midst of becoming a published author, hopefully, I do have a manuscript of my novel is under consideration with a major publisher. That is a long process, made all the more confusing by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm not sure where we're at with that, but attempting to write a series of novels based on primarily our experiences as human beings with PTSD and traumatic experiences and how it can affect some people and others it doesn't. And conversely, how if you've experienced it maybe in childhood and then you are in a traumatic experience later in life, it doesn't affect you where others it may. And this is set in the backdrop of the First World War. It tells the story of primarily a main German character and a main French character, but the German character is the important one in the book. He has experienced a great deal of trauma as a child. A lot of negative experiences, and as he then enters the war effort, and the First World War started out as a glorious romp, but this is going to be an extension of the Napoleonic Wars. It's going to be a couple of weeks long. We're going to walk over there and do the deed, and it's going to be done, and we'll gain some territory, and it'll be all said, like many of the wars of the 19th century had been. And obviously, anyone that knows the history of the First World War, it's a cataclysm that is a stain on humankind. But it tells the story of this individual who he enters into the war carrying this wound already. He's not wearing it on his sleeve, but he's carrying it. And he meets a mixture of German soldiers from all over the country, and they're full of various forms of bravado and bluster, but many of them haven't been through the things he's been through. And as we find as we go through the book, they have a common experience, a traumatic experience, and it unhinges. It lays bare those who hadn't been exposed to this. Some of them are fine. Some of them are broken for life. And this individual finds that he's not affected by this traumatic experience, but what it is doing is he's finding himself changed and he never knew why. And so the book the series of books ultimately is going to take us from the First World War through Germany in the post-war period, during the Weimar period, with the hyperinflation and the loss of identity and everything that went with it. And then with that comes the rise then of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. The same individual is going to carry through the three books. and his degraded mental state as he never received any type of help for these experiences. And it's a book about human experience through trauma and through warfare. And it's very technical, but it's not technical in a sense that it couldn't be read and enjoyed. You don't need to be.
I was about to say, well, good God.
Yeah, no, you don't have to be an expert on German artillery and German tactics and German uniforms. I do use a great deal of technical information in the books, and there is a great glossary of terms in the back of the book that's going to explain anything that you want to know. But really, just the experience, the human experience of moving through a cataclysm while you're carrying your own demons, and what that can mean, might mean, could mean, what your future could hold in a historical context, because we know what happened to Germany, and we know loses both world wars within a span of 30 years, and what that did for culture and so forth. And I feel that it strikes a tone in today. I really
well, that's what I was
do.
going to say. It is.
We've been fighting our own Vietnam as a country in Afghanistan and Iraq now for more than 20 years, really. And we've been fighting proxy wars there since the 90s. And now we're finding that our soldiers are not receiving the care that they need, the brain injuries they've received, the traumatic injuries that they've received. Our society now doesn't know that we're at war. This isn't the Second World War where we're rationing meat and tires and tin, and we have to eat carrots on this day, and we have to keep our lights turned off at night because we don't know if the Japanese or the Germans are going to come and bomb us, and we can't eat fats unless it's Tuesday. We're not at war. None of us know that we have soldiers in an active combat zone because it doesn't affect us.
Right.
Our soldiers they volunteer, they go, they serve, they come back, or they don't. And it doesn't really affect us. And they're forced to just assimilate into a society that doesn't even know that they went. It doesn't really respect their service.
Yeah.
When we see someone with a Vietnam hat on, or Korea, or if we still see someone with a World War II, you immediately think, oh, thank you for your service. Oh my gosh, I'm so proud to meet you. But if someone was walking down the street with an Afghanistan hat on, would you run up to him? And would we? You should.
Yeah.
His or her service is no different. But we as a society right now aren't even really thinking about the wars that we're fighting. And so the traumatic injuries that these soldiers are receiving, they're just being asked to assimilate back to society. And so I think that this novel that I have written, and these series that I want to continue to write, is poignant because it touches upon something that we're struggling with as a society now, and it's something that's not being talked about.
Well, and I think what also sucks about it is the way that our government talks about it. They're never like men and women. They're boots on the ground. We're sending boots on the ground. And that infuriates me. Yeah. And I've asked soldiers, does that bother you? Oh, I don't know, that doesn't. Well, it should. Yeah. Because you're fodder. You're fodder for a rich man's world kind of thing.
Well, and yes, there's a certain amount of, when you join the military, you now are going to have the rules that you had before broken and retaught to you of what now is acceptable behavior. And in doing so, we need to give you a new identity, because you and I know that we can't do violence onto others.
Yeah.
We don't live violent lives, and we don't adhere to that. We're not armed. But when you go in the military, you are now armed, and you are now purposely put in a place where violence is going to be done unto you, and you will then do violence. So we give you a new identity, but the problem is the army and the military and the government doesn't do anything to give you your identity back afterwards. That's the problem, and we don't have the fraternity and the brotherhood of soldiers retiring from war now and coming together. Just real quick, I mean, this really started with our Vietnam experience. In the Second World War, in Korea, and all of the wars fought before that, soldiers were shipped home in units. Long, slow ship process based on technology, but also because they allowed soldiers to fraternize and to talk about your experiences and to break down and talk about your future and to be together, land together, disembark together, and then you got a parade, you got a welcome home. Well, in Vietnam, soldiers were in and out in 24 hours. You deployed by yourself, you came home, you were in and out of the war zone, and you showed up at the airport where there was no come home parade, you were spit on. And people didn't understand what you're doing and why you're there, and the traumatic experience of leaving a war zone and coming back again. And now you're not allowed to kill anymore. Now you're Joe the plumber, okay?
Yeah.
And we've been on that since Vietnam. We've never had the ticker tape parade for any Afghan or Iraq veterans. We've never had speeches and memorials on 4th of July. We don't see anything on the television. Nobody's talking about it. So these soldiers are being subjected to that same treatment that Vietnam soldiers were, where it's like, I'm going to take your identity, make you a killer, and then when you come back, can you just figure it out on your own because we're busy fighting a war here.
Right.
And that's the very nature of setting yourself up for PTSD. And I guess what I'm exploring is that PTSD wasn't just invented.
Right. That's just it.
This is something that has existed through eons of human experience, and how has it been dealt with? And you know, the stilted Edwardian era of the First World War, where men didn't show their feelings and didn't cry and didn't talk about things. That's, you know, very similar to where we're at now, where it's okay for men to talk about your feelings as long as it's not about war and stuff like that. We don't want to talk about what really happened to you.
Well, and it kind of, I mean, I don't, it's one of the things that I hate about 4th of July here, is that they're all saying, could you not do the flaming fireworks all day long? I mean, 4th of July is one thing, but we have ours, it starts on, well, ours start in May, but legally.
This is Indiana. I know she talked about that. We're in Indiana, where it's totally legal. This is no laws being broken.
But even here in Crown Point, the ordinance says like June 29th to July 6th or something like that. Like, it's like, knock your shit off. And it's like, people are saying, please don't do this. My husband like was in Afghanistan, and it bothers him. People don't care.
Right.
And that's what it's kind of like. You're like, yo, go USA, and then you're traumatizing a man in his home.
Right. It's like, we're doing our rockets red glare because it's, you know, the bombs are bursting in air. Look at us. We're declaring our freedom against dastardly England and blah, blah, blah. Which, mind you, that's War of 1812. We already had our freedom. We were about to lose it again. So don't mix that up. A lot of people mix that up. The bombs bursting in the air is that, you know, War of 1812. Anyway, yeah, you have soldiers who have had bombs bursting in air and now are trying to be at home and are suffering. And now we're going to celebrate by traumatizing them for a weekend before. You know, it doesn't make any sense, the way we celebrate that.
And it's like, go USA, you know, like, but you don't give a shit that your neighbor is suffering right now inside his home, and you're shooting off sticks of dynamite. Right.
And I don't know how we would alleviate that, because I wouldn't want to go door to door in the middle of June and be like, knock, knock, knock. Hi, is there anybody here with PTSD?
Yeah.
That's the last thing that you'd want to do. So how do we change this societally? Hey, look, you can't do private displays. Yeah, good luck with that. It's Indiana. There's not much else to do here. You know, they're illegal in Illinois, and so you know you never hear a firework go off.
Oh, never. Like when we lived in Frankfurt, in Illinois.
Yeah, right.
But there was like a haze all the time. Like
Frankfurt is kind of. I mean, you know, I don't want to go there. No, really, honestly, in Illinois, it's the same.
Yeah, and it just irks me. And well, and this year, National Treason Day here.
Right. You ungrateful subjects day.
Yeah, so we didn't celebrate. We like stayed in the house because
tea all day.
Yeah,
yeah. Dumped none of it in any body of water.
No,
it's unthinkable.
Hazel's baby pool.
Yeah. Dressed as a Native American.
Yeah.
That's the part that's left out of the story too. But anyway.
But yeah, Mike was just like, it's ridiculous. And I mean, your whatever unit or whatever has been asked to do our 4th of July parade. Yeah, Mike's like 100 and.
Why would a Confederate cavalry unit march?
Well, we do have a Union one.
I know, but why are we going to? I mean, just stop and think about it, though.
Because it's 104 and you want to wear wool?
Well, there's that. But it's just, again, it's just touching upon what I was talking about earlier without digging it all back up again. Just a misunderstanding of our history. The last people that should be invited to a 4th of July parade are treasonous soldiers.
Right.
4 years of open treason is what our Civil War is. Hey guys, come on down. We're gonna wave the stars and flag.
That's like all of the people that have their Confederate flags here in Indiana. I'm like, do you know the history? I mean, common history. We weren't on that side here in Indiana.
No, proud Union supporters.
Right. But then you have, it's in my heritage and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you did Ancestry.com?
Yeah, right. I don't recall that there's a Confederate DNA that comes up in that.
Right. It drives me insane.
Again, though, very important, if you do have an ancestor that was a Confederate soldier, talk about it. That's incredible. I want to hear about it.
Right.
Let's learn about that. And what did that mean? And what has that meant to your family all these years? And what maybe should it mean?
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of people, you know, oh, I'm really proud because my great grandfather was a Confederate soldier and my nephew's in the Army now. I was like, well, you do realize the two of those are diametrically opposed to one another. One of them is because when you join the Army or any branch of military, the first thing you do is you have to swear fealty to defend the Constitution and the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, which is the President. And the Confederates were doing the opposite. So, you know, your nephew and your great-great-grandpa are diametrically opposed to one another, and your nephew has sworn an oath to put down your great-grandfather. You do understand that. Like, that's the part where you don't mix, it's a little weird, all the smoke in the air. Don't mix Confederate service with modern military service, because that's not, modern military service would be called out to put you down. That's what happened the first time around, and that's what would happen now. You know? A misunderstanding there, I think.
Yeah, that's
something lost in translation.
Yeah, it's a little murky. That's the murkiness. So, okay, so when, like, what are you hoping for this book? Like, when do you think it's gonna?
A lot of hopes, hopes, dreams, and maybe unreasonable. Well, again, we need to come out first and foremost. I mean, obviously, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, which is real.
Not here in Indiana, though.
Oh, there's a bubble.
Yeah, we're fine.
That's really fortunate. We got to get a bubble over Illinois too. And really, if we can work on the whole country, that'd be excellent. We need to get through this as a people first.
Yeah.
Publishing industry, not so much. For the first couple of months of the pandemic, I'm sure we're closed. Publishers also are infamous for, we'll take your work, we'll let you know if we like it, but we won't if we don't. So I'm still within a grace period that I could expect to get an email back. And I tell myself, don't check your email every 15, 20 minutes. That's unnecessary. Maybe let's be real, an hour. Hoping to hear back, but you know, the publishing process is historically and traditionally been an arduous one.
Yeah.
And I do want to be published with a real publisher. Not to say that self-publishing isn't real, but I would like distribution, because I'm writing because I want to share the story. And self-publishing does limit your ability to get your book out. And, so I'm hoping to get published, and if I can, I'll be contracted to write the other 2 novels, and we'll be very, very busy at the keyboard if that happens, because, you know,
you're gonna have to quit your job.
You know, when you're in college and the professor says, I want, you know, 5,000 words for this, and you're like, 5,000 words, and then you write a book and you're like, 227,000 words, did I actually write that? And then it hits you to do that 2 more times. I wrote a series.
Yeah.
I'm up to the challenge.
Yeah.
I'm up to the challenge. I've got the stories in me. We'll make this happen.
And then you're gonna be famous, like.
Oh yeah, for sure. You'll ask any author. What usually happens is that you write a book, you write a couple other ones, you become a bestseller, you gain a great deal of wealth from that, because there's an exchange your thoughts for money, which is how this works. And then you just live on an island somewhere like Hemingway.
Yeah.
With a bunch of cats with extra toes. You don't want the story to end that way, though. But that was in his family. His father committed suicide. He had a grandfather commit suicide. Anyway, and you still saw the cats with all the toes, right?
Well, here's the thing.
What's that called?
I don't know.
That's
Mittens.
a dinosaur.
They're mittens cats. That's what we call it. That's the technical term.
That must be Latin. That's their Latin name. Mittenus, catness.
We went. We took the boys down because Mike had 2 weeks off, so we slowly went down to the Keys.
No, this wasn't the time that resulted. Emergency surgery.
No. This is the time. Well, I thought you were doing this because this is where we were drinking all the way down, and then I was like, wet pregnancy test.
Oh no, I was referring to Mike's emergency surgery, not your 9-month prolonged emergency surgery.
I had Hazel.
Hey, so, it's a charming story.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
but we went to Key West, and we had gone to somewhere. I can't remember where we went. We took a St. Augustine. Okay. We went to St. Augustine and we took their tour thing. Yeah. And so they're like, oh, if you take this ticket and do the same tour in another city, you can use this and you get half off. Okay. So we were down Key West, we took it. And at the time, I think Ted was 2 and Jack was 4.
Just a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, just a minute ago. And it was so funny because like Ted was like waving to everybody while we were on the little tour thing. And these guys are like totally shit-faced drunk. And they're like, and partying. And he's like,
the charm of being American.
So it was spring break-ish.
Okay.
So
isn't it always spring break-ish in the Keys?
I think so.
What do they do there besides spring break?
I don't know. I don't think anything. Write books.
One guy did.
But yeah, we went by his house, but it was like how fun. Like my kids would have been more interested in the kitties than
many people that go to his house for a tour probably just want to see cats with extra toes.
Well, and then so we were staying at Isa Morada, one of the whatever.
Okay.
And just down the street at the Bass Pro Shop was Hemingway's boat. So we went and saw his boat.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, so we saw his boat. And we drove past the kitties
right,
in the
right.
house.
And see, and that's exactly what happens to you when you write a bestseller.
Right, that's good.
And you live in the Keys, and you have cats with extra toes. So I'm looking forward to all of that.
That is going to be amazing.
That's in my future.
And then your of course your boat will end up in a Bass Pro Shop.
You know, I can't picture me with a boat. I really can't. It's not my bag. I mean, nothing offense boating. I do like canoeing. It's been a long time though. I could have a canoe. That would be nice. My author's canoe.
Well, I think we've hit everything. Is there anything else you would like to talk about? I know you brought notes.
Yes, I did. No, anytime I'm going to talk history, unless you know it forward and back, you should always refresh. Yes. Because to me, it's very irksome when you want to talk about history and you either misquote, say the wrong information altogether, or use such vagaries. You know, to me, I didn't want to come here. This is not like the encyclopedia show, but it's just, if you ask me a question, I don't want to, if I'm going to use a statistic or something like that, it's best that it's right. So yeah, I brought some notes just as a refresher, but we don't need to talk about anything.
Well, and don't throw up a monument because the guy looked good on a horse. No, it's history. Yeah,
right, exactly. And that's it. Don't also formulate an opinion about whether the monuments need to stay up or come down unless you've ever seen one. I recommend to anyone who's in the Midwest and arguing so vehemently about this, have you ever been to the South? Have you been to Charleston, South Carolina? Have you been to Atlanta, Georgia? Have you been to Memphis, Tennessee? Knoxville, Tennessee? You ever been anywhere that any of this history is on the surface? Because it's not on the surface here. Again, this is a sanitary environment for the Civil War. We have Grant. We have the Iron Brigade hailed from the Midwest. Very exciting stuff. Obviously, our history with Old Abe. That's great. We don't have battles that raged here. We don't have battlefields. We don't have Confederate monuments. We don't have any of that. Yeah. Go down south and see it. See anything? Yeah. Get out of your car. Walk around the neighborhood for a while. Get out. Experience the neighborhood and take in the sights. How do you feel about it? Then you can better formulate an opinion. Don't know who you're defending. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, everybody they're starting to take down monuments in Charleston, and it's like, if you've been to Charleston, you want to see some Confederate flags, go to Charleston. Yeah. No one's talking about taking them down there either, by the way. It's just kind of like, this is where the war started. This is how it's going to stay. And you do have Fort Sumter sitting out in the harbor. I mean, but they took down Calhoun. Everyone's like, why'd you take down Calhoun? I don't know. Wikipedia is enough information to know. I mean, you know, again, don't get angry about something unless you know what you're talking about. And even if you take the Fort Sumter tour, you learn that they were having the slaves make all of the bricks for the, and like, and it's like, well, I mean, they do pay tribute to that, though. They're like, this was not built by soldiers. No, this was built by the slaves. For soldiers. Right. There's a big difference. And that was the thing that, like, something that was a gut punch to me, because, like, we just said, you don't talk about that in history. Well, and I know you probably want to end this, but more than anything in the world, Fort Pulaski. If anyone's going to take a fort tour, yeah, Fort Sumter's cool. Fort Moultrie's cooler because that's the fort that fired on Fort Sumter, and that was an active fort from the 1700s to like 1957. Active that whole time, so that's pretty cool. Wasn't Fort Sumter too? No, Sumter was actually never active. They never finished building it before the war. It was a radar station. Oh, okay. But like Fort Moultrie, they put in like 18-inch artillery pieces and anti-submarine nets and stuff like that. Like, this was literally in their minds defending Charleston from all takers. But if you go down to Savannah, Georgia, so you can actually drive. That's gonna be hard. No, you can drive from Charleston to Savannah. When you get to Savannah, Robert E. Lee, when he graduated from the West Point, and he was one of the greatest engineers this country's ever produced, he was tasked with strengthening the coastal defenses of our country, because this was at a time when forts meant something. And he engineered the building of Fort Pulaski, which is just outside of Savannah. They used it for the Lincoln movie. It was about 10 years ago. It is an incredible piece of work. The fact that it actually saw combat, was defeated, and is still standing. But when you stand there, you realize that all of the rock that fort makes, all of the outside moats and gullies and things is hewn from coral. You could see that it's coral in the 1840s. And there's a little sign that says, oh, by the by, like, 10 or 12,000 slaves died building this fort. And it's like, oh, that should be a bigger sign. That should be like this is how forts were built. It's not a construction crew that came in over here. It was, fresh off the boat, here's your shovel, you know. But it's an incredible work. If you want to go see a fort and climb around it all day, it's what a fort looks like in your head. It's huge.
Yeah, nobody does that anymore.
No.
I did. Well, my dad was a huge history fan, and that's why I wish that he was still alive, because he brought us to reenactments as teenagers. Yeah. And we took the trip that went up Michigan, through Canada, down through Wisconsin.
So you got to see all the
forts. We got to see every fort.
Hey, come on, there's some good stuff up there.
But as a teenager,
I would have liked it.
Well, that's different. But yeah, no, my sister is like, can we get back to the pool? Right. And I'm like, yeah, Sunset Beach is on. Megan's got to get back to watch her soul. But my brother got to shoot. That was the other thing that I hated, is that they were taking kids to shoot muskets. I was a little, they always gave it to the boys. So my brother got to shoot a musket. I didn't get to.
Yeah, that's a whole different show.
Yeah, I know.
That's a second edition.
But yeah, and so he can say he shot a gun, and I can't. I still have never shot a gun.
You could have had any reenactment said, "Hey, Mike. Hey, Ryan, why don't you load me up a musket and pass it to me?" Next time. If there is ever a next time. Right. There may never be a next time.
Well, we could go in the basement and grab one of his and just shoot it right
This
now.
is Indiana, because this is a firework.
Like, yeah, it's a firework.
Oh, yeah, if it would come out in July, you wouldn't even hear it.
1103.
That's the 1103 gun from the Alice residence.
When he did buy his gun down in the courthouse, we have a gun shop.
Right, as most Indiana towns do.
Well, no, they have historic guns, just in their defense. We bought we bought one from them, and he's like, oh my god, I can't wait until to shoot this off. Let's go shoot it in the backyard. And I'm like, okay. So he goes out. We go all the way back to the backyard.
Because it's quieter further from the building.
He shoots it off, and I'm like, oh my god. And it was like one of those things. It was slow motion, like him shooting it off. We have a school there. My kids go to school over there. There's a junior high a couple blocks from there, and we're shooting guns off.
Look, I just would like to say in his defense that when you fire a Civil War musket, it's just gunpowder in a tube. No bullet, no projectile.
Oh, I thought it was cornmeal.
Okay, so corn, a non-lethal projectile. Yes. Corn dust comes out. But no different than any of the fireworks that the kids are like. It sounds the same. It's the same idea.
This one rattled windows.
Oh yeah, well, because Mike probably triple charged it, because that's your husband's charge. But it's dangerous, and I'm not recommending children play with musketry. But it's not like putting a lead ball in here and fire it in the air and hope it doesn't land on the school. That would be. Well,
he shot it off, and then we look at each other. We're like, "Oh shit, that was loud!" And I start running to the door. I turn around. He's gone. I'm like, "Where the hell did he go?" So I'm in the house. He was hiding in the garage, and he comes walking down the yard
like nothing happened.
Because the cops are all fired.
Nothing says it's your fault that explosion just went off like everyone running.
Right.
You should look around and say, "What was that? What was that?" And then it doesn't look like it was. Well, you put the gun down. Put the gun down, and then look surprised.
Yeah, but someday maybe you guys will.
If anyone wants to know any more about my writing in the
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
Why don't we plug your blog?
Yeah, I have a blog, a website. I'm on Instagram. It's www.ryanwestonwrites. WESTON writes.
I'll put that when I post the video.
In there. You can.
I'll put the link in the comments so people can do that too.
Follow me on Instagram. I do a lot of daily historical posts, and I try very hard to connect what happened on this day or relatively this day in history to what's going on now. Yep. It's not just me talking about like today this tank was cool. Like we're going to talk about things that mean something to the world we're in right now. And then if you want to get deeper than that, if you like just superficial history stuff and some other fun things, check out my Instagram. If you really want to get into some deeper history, go on my website. It's www.ryanwestonwrites.com, and my blog is on there, and there's a great deal of reenacting and what it means to be a reenactor, some of my experiences, and then I'm also segueing into traveling and what history you encounter as you travel. Good stuff on there.
Coming all the way down here.
All the way to the far exotic lands.
Well, and we did originally have this plan for April Fool's, because I was like, "That's the day you want to choose." Okay, but then
I have a weird sense of humor. But then
the
pandemic happened, and that's a serious thing.
And then we're gonna go drink beer, because that's what we're good at.
It's hot out here. I could use
beer. All right. Well, this is a Cheeky Mom.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you came. And I couldn't even tell you what I'm doing the next week because I haven't even looked at my calendar.
Well,
so
after your rabid fans glom onto this,
yes,
I'll be back next week because you guys are going to want more of this.
Well, we'll definitely have you back, especially when your book comes out.
Well,
let's
do that before that because we might look completely different when it finally comes out. I'm glad to be back on your show.
We'll do it from your super yacht.
From my super canoe.
Okay, now I got to figure out how to.
Don't ask me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Peace, love, and cheekiness, and we will see you next week.